So the album is called Chapter 3, We Return to Light, which is
Right.
kind of a culmination of a three-part trilogy of Chapter 1, Forever for Now, and Chapter 2, How
Right.
Dark It Is Before Dawn. So that kind of traces a cycle through the pain as allegorized by moving
Mhm.
through a day from evening into night, finally into the healing and strength of morning. Spent my
Mhm.
teens and 20s, being really deeply involved in listening to psychedelic trance and going to Goa and being in parties. And so even if I don't do that anymore, it's still a big part of who I am. It really influenced me. Over the years, the more my music, I guess, has expanded out of the classical, I've had to think of new ways to play to make it make sense. I come out and I sit down and people expect to hear what they're going to hear. And actually what they hear is this like sound bath of reverbs coming from me alone on stage. And it's so exciting. Happiness, we sometimes think of it as quite light and fluffy, but actually when you've been through things that are difficult, happiness is hard won, and
Mhm.
it's really badass and it's really strong.
Welcome to News 18 Sosha. I am Yatamanyu Narain and I'm with the uber talented Anoushka Shankar, who has secured two Grammy nominations and is all set to release the album Chapter 3. So we are going to talk about that and more. Welcome to the show, Anushka.
Thank you so much.
Right. So first of all, congratulations on the two Grammy nominations this year. How does it feel to be recognized as such a prestigious platform for the 11th time, if I'm not wrong?
Yeah, I mean, 10th and 11th this year for
Right.
two
Right.
nominations, which is, I mean, it's a huge honor. It's very exciting. It feels good, of course.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's lovely, and we'll see what happens. And it's a weird process, all this awards stuff. But it's fun to be nominated, and it feels great.
Speaking of your upcoming album, Chapter 3, it draws inspiration from India and your personal connection to it. So I wanted to know, how did the mindfulness of India shape the theme and soundscape of this particular album?
So the album is called Chapter 3, We Return to Light, which
Right.
is kind of a culmination of a three-part trilogy of Chapter 1, Forever for Now, and Chapter 2, How
Right.
Dark It Is Before Dawn. So that kind of traces a cycle through the pain as allegorized by moving
Mhm.
through a day from evening into night, finally into the healing and strength of morning.
Right.
So for me, right from when I started making Chapter 1 and had that idea in my head, I always pictured that kind of strong Indian sun as the kind of visual imagery for Chapter 3. Just that the strength of the orange sun, the way we see it here, is so
Yeah.
different from everywhere else. And it was that heat I wanted to capture. And so that kind of somehow that just in an abstract way really influenced a lot of the music making that I wanted to work with Indian collaborators, have it be perhaps the most overtly turning back towards roots than the previous chapters, which are a lot more experimental, a lot more um, kind
Right.
of multi-genre, non-genre. This is still very experimental. It's not classical. It's not anything like that. But I feel like at its root, there's a strong Indian center.
Right. 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 So, Daybreak opens the album with joy and optimism. So, how do you envision the track setting the tone for listeners? I mean, both on the album and when you're going to perform it live for them?
Yeah. So I mean, making the album is one thing, and then how we then present it live is like a whole new
Uh,
incarnation of the music, right? So on the record, it was very informed by this journey I had in my head of times of day, symbolizing what they
right.
can mean. And so chapter 3 was really from the point of sunset into full heat of day. For example,
Right.
when you're on the dance floor on the beach and you feel full of
Right.
that energy and you feel so strong and powerful and joyful and connected to other people. And
Right.
so, imagery then influences the music. And so the
Right.
music has a lot of pulse, a lot of
Right.
vibe. Daybreak is a very optimistic kind of major scale melody. So it's very happy. Um, there's a little bit of, reflection and nostalgia in a couple of moments, but overall it's a very happy record.
So, Goa's rave culture is a unique inspiration for this album. So, how did the energy of those secret forest raves influence tracks like, Dancing on Scorched Earth?
hmm Well, yeah, Dancing on Scorched Earth, We Burn So Brightly. I think those are a couple of the tracks that dig a little bit more overtly into that influence. But still, it's not my intention to kind of ape other genres of music. It's more about
Mhm.
taking the spirit of what it feels like. I spent my
Mhm.
teens and 20s, g being really deeply involved in listening to psychedelic trance and going to Goa and being in parties. And so even if I don't do that anymore, it's still a big part of who I am. It really influenced me. And
It's
so
there.
It's in there. And so like just kind of making music that tries to kind of just bring that essence of that hypnosis and that groove
Right.
into the music on my instrument and in my music. It just felt like a nice thing I wanted to do.
And you have also embraced, looping, bending sound, and other technological techniques in Chapter 3. So, how do you see these innovations, complementing the traditional aspects of the sitar?
So technology's, been a part of art since the beginning of time. You figure out how to blow into a bamboo flute, a piece of bamboo, and that makes a flute, right? So over the years, the more my music, I guess, has expanded out of the classical, I've had to think of new ways to play to make it make sense. Even something as simple as modulating through different keys, which Western music does all the time. Our instruments are not meant for that. So I've had to
Right.
think how I keep my frets and how I tune. And in the last 10 years, I think I've really dug more into just really enjoying things like playing with a pedal board and getting to
Right.
have effects that alter how I play and make
Right.
delays and loop. And I've
Right.
become kind of good at that actually. And
Yes. Yes. Yes.
it's something I really enjoy. So by the time I've got to these chapters, I wanted to dig into that in the composition practice as well. So chapter 2, for example, is a very sonically unusual space. There are some songs on there that people would have no idea what the instruments are, or maybe it sounds fully electronic. It's very
Right.
reverby and ambient and expansive. It's actually nothing but sitar because we found ways to kind of alter the reverb attack delays on the sitar to make it be that space. And then I got to figure out how to do that live too. So I opened the show with I come out and I sit down and people expect to hear what they're going to hear. And actually what they hear is this like sound bath of reverbs coming from me alone on stage. And it's so exciting and it's so fulfilling. I love it.
Right, right, right. So, working with Sarathy Korwar and Alam Khan, it brought a fresh perspective to this project. So, how did their creative contribution, shape the album's narrative?
So one of the parameters I set myself when I started these three chapters was that I wanted a different set of collaborators on every record, so that it would bring me into a different place. So
Right.
chapter 1, Forever for Now, Aru Jaftab was my producer.
Yeah.
And chapter 2, I worked with a dear friend who's an incredible film composer, Peter Rayburn. So that kind of visual storytelling element could come out. Then I wanted to come back home and I wanted to work with Alam, and it also felt like I wanted someone else to round out our duo and help ground that. And Sarathy
Mhm.
Korwar, as a percussionist composer, felt like the
Right.
perfect person to do that. He's also been touring with me for 2 years as part of the Chapters tour. So I've loved his music for a long time, but we've become a lot closer. So he felt like
Right.
a good fit.
Right. That dynamics is there. When you're performing live, the dynamics has improved over the time. Right.
Exactly.
Right. So, Hirayat features a hidden nod to Rag Palas Kafi, a creation of your father, Pandit Ravi Shankar ji.
Mhm.
So, what inspired you to weave this Easter egg into the trap?
I mean, it's very intuitive, a lot of this process. Alam actually had the initial seed of that idea, and it was a series of looping melodies and repetitive refrains that we could interlock and play together. And as
Right.
we did that, I just suddenly heard in my head, like there was something about it that just made me think of that. And I
Right.
played it, and it just sounded so beautiful. And we
Right.
both kind of looked at each other, and it was a little bit emotional because both our fathers had played
Exactly.
that together in some of their iconic performances. So it was like, are we going to do it? Yeah, let's do it. And maybe for
Okay.
some of the people who know and follow that music, they would love that so much.
Yeah.
But if you don't know, it's okay. It's just a beautiful melody. But yeah, it's meaningful for people who know.
Right, right. And in We Burn So Brightly, you capture the energy of alchemy and movement. So, what emotions or experiences drove the creation of that particular piece?
I suppose they're all different aspects of how I'm using light and heat as an allegory for strength and healing, right? So chapter 2 went so deeply into night as a space
Right,
of contemplation and cocooning and
right.
regeneration, that then that leads you into a place where now you can be strong, and
Oh,
so some of that, happiness, we sometimes think of it as quite light and fluffy, but actually when you've been through things that are difficult, happiness is hard won, and it's
mhm,
it's really badass and it's really strong. And so
mhm.
a song like We Burn So Brightly is almost about the idea that sometimes you literally have to burn things from your past. Like there's that
Yeah,
act of really killing the old
yeah.
in order to
Old.
be in the new. And
Embrace the, yeah, embrace the new.
it's a very empowering, very powerful thing to do.
Right, right, right. And Amrita is a Sanskrit word which is often associated with immortality and nectar in Indian mythology. So, I mean, what does the title signify in the context of this track and the broader themes of, chapter three?
I mean, it's a great, I mean, so all of this music is instrumental, and this is something I've dealt with my whole career. Most of my music is instrumental, and so titling is how you tell people what the story is,
Right,
right?
right,
You give people a little seed, and they can interpret it how they want. So
right,
actually the three chapters, if you look at the three titles together, they form a haiku that tells a story, and then
right,
all the songs also tell a story. So Amrita comes right before the final song, which is we
right,
return to light.
right,
So it's about
right,
kind of remembering that whatever all of this is, there is something bigger. There is something that we belong to that's bigger than these individual moments and journeys. And that, in a global context or in an individual context, you
right.
can always turn back to the light. You always will return to the light. There is something, eternal about that.
Right. Interesting. So, like you said, nostalgia and renewal are recurring themes in the album. So, how do these ideas, resonate with you as an artist and as an individual?
I mean, I guess I'm a creative, so I feel things very deeply. I think deeply. I live with very thin skin through most things in my life. So I often, have very heightened emotions, whether they're joy, pain. I feel a lot of nostalgia for memories. I also was brought up in this way that was kind of across centuries. My father was
Okay.
60 years older than me, and also so representative of our ancient older
Right.
culture. And at the same time, I lived in my time, and so I kind of felt these like stretches across time, and also homesickness across geographies. So as much as like whenever I'm feeling at home somewhere, I'm always missing somewhere else. Or whenever I
Okay.
feel like I'm doing something that I love, there's also something else I've abandoned to do it. So
Right.
so there's always this kind of dichotomy of joy and
Okay.
missing and longing, which yeah, it's a part of life, isn't it?
Right. Right. So, like you said, the trilogy ends with the idea of, returning to light. How do you interpret this concept in your personal and creative life?
So I guess the chapters are my way of just sharing what I've learned and how I've learned to have faith. Because, if you live long enough, you have enough experience that like mm, you move through most things,
Yeah.
as horrible as they can be when you go through something. When a teenager goes through their first breakup, and you try and tell them something, they're like, "What are you talking about? This is the love of my life. I'll never fall in love again. I'll never be okay." And of course, eventually they are. And by the time you're in your 30s and dating, if you have a divorce or a heartbreak, you kind of know like this sucks, but I'm gonna be okay. And it's that, you go through things, and you can offer that message to other people as well. Like you can say, I've been there, you'll be okay, and it's that collectivity of how you move through things,
Right.
which is also what we return to light means, or we return to love. If we keep choosing to turn towards trying to keep our hearts open or
So,
trying to be in connection with others,
not to
then we
ourselves.
will be. It's basically, if you think about that in a global context, if everybody gives up, we're done for, right? There's
Yeah, done.
nothing left.
Yeah.
So you have to keep making that choice as the individual to be open, because then there's a chance as a globe that you are, in.
Exactly. Hope is the answer.
That's
Right.
it.
So, I mean, you have chosen vinyl as one of the formats for this release. What makes this medium special for you, especially in the context of a trilogy that spans history and modernity?
I mean, I think on one level, the music being released in chapters is a very digital concept. It's,
Right.
the kind of streaming has changed the need for a conventional 60-minute album. You can release music how and when you want to, and that's very freeing. Paradoxically, that's also created a market for people who really want to listen deeply, who want to own something physical in such a flooded market. They want to have so doing this with these limited edition vinyls as well means that for people who want to be a collector of this, who want to follow that journey physically, that they can. And I think there's something very obviously warm sonically, but also reminiscent and beautiful about vinyl.
Right. 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 So, I mean, like you said, that trilogy speaks of resilience and hope. What lessons have you personally drawn from this whole creative journey, and how do they inform your future work?
That might be easier to answer more in the future, because I'll
Right.
have more hindsight by then. Um,
Right.
but one thing I do know is I probably have more faith that I can trust my intuition, because
Right.
in
Right.
a way this was a bonkers idea. like turning one album into three albums, three
Yeah,
different producers, three different countries, three different sets of musicians, walking into
three
each
different names.
studio.
The
Yeah.
names are also
Booking a studio with no music recorded, going in with a blank slate, see what happens. But there's something about creative intuition that is so real, like if I feel that sense, oh, I want to get in a room with Aruj, what's going to happen? Or with
Mhm.
Peter, he and his wife are good friends of mine. I literally was just going to stay at their house for a few days because I had a show in LA, and I said, hey, you want to make an album since I'm there? It's just something about following that creative intuition
Right,
feels like it's solidified
right,
even more for me because I can see it works.
right, right. So finally, I mean, what are your upcoming projects in 2025, and do you have a tour planned?
Yeah, so
Uh,
we're touring the three chapters in totality quite extensively around the world, and we're going to finish in India at the end of the year, which I'm really looking forward to. We're also orchestrating like a symphonic version of the three chapters so that they exist
yeah.
in that space where I get to play with an orchestra, which will be lovely. And then there's a couple other projects, like there's a creative trio that I'm working on with two incredible
Oh,
musicians that I can't wait to talk
okay,
about when that
okay.
happens. Yeah, and other maybe things. We'll see.
Lovely, lovely. So yeah, that's it from my end. Thank you so much for joining, Anushka. I mean, it was pleasure speaking with you, and we all are eagerly waiting to listen to chapter 3 and all the amazing stuff that we are going to release later this year.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, thank you, thank you
Bye.
so much. Bye. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you.